Welcome everybody to another episode of the Third Hour of Power. This is Grady of This Mormon Life, and this week I'm joined again by Ben Bernards. Ben, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Howdy, everybody. Glad to be here. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So Ben, for anyone who may have missed the last episode when you were on here, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name is Ben Bernards. I'm a Utah native. Come from a big Mormon family in a small little farming town. I served a mission in the South Pacific, and right now I work professionally as a project manager for a fruity computer company in California. And then on the side, I love speaking at youth conference and EFY and young single adults, and just kind of going around and talking to people. So I've got a book out and a handful of talks on CD and that sort of a thing. So I just love helping people understand the gospel and learning about it myself.
Yeah, I drilled down a few months ago just about the blog, the website, This Mormon Life, and what I was trying to do, and really it was just that whole idea of I'm trying to just help people be happy. Mm-hmm. That's why we do this podcast, to help people to get more out of their third hour lessons, help them as teachers to be comfortable with what they're going to teach, or those who are learners who maybe want to get more out of the lesson and participate and come to class with all the answers already, so they can have more of a discussion rather than a quiz to see how much you know.
Yeah.
We're here to help you guys with that.
Yeah.
And this lesson.
That's one of the things we don't want people to have happen is they get to that third hour and the teacher's like, okay, who's read the lesson? Who knows what we're talking about? And nobody knows. And so they pull it out and he's like, okay, let's start reading from the top. And they just quote the whole book. I mean, that's not good. We can do better than that.
It's the worst. And I've been in so many quorums like that. And so we want to help you guys out. And this lesson I love because it's kind of adding to that. It's this idea of continuing to learn things. In fact, chapter 17 of the Gordon B. Hinckley Manual says, or is entitled, Continue in the Great Process of Learning. Ben, I'll let you lead off. What were some of the things that stood out to you from the lesson?
Oh man, this is absolutely fabulous. The whole value of education is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I have been on both ends of the coin. I would say that the uneducated and underprepared, and I've seen how it affects families where the mom and the dad don't have enough education to really survive and thrive in the world. And now I'm on the other side where I was able to actually graduate and see what can happen. Is I'm super passionate about, and anytime I have like missionaries over for dinner, this is something that I always start drilling about. I'm like, okay, I don't want to distract you, but let's talk about future education stuff. Right there in section number 1.
I know you're going to ask me for referrals, but first, before we get there, let me tell you about something else.
Yeah, exactly. In at the very beginning, life story that he has, there's a little tagline he has right before the picture that I highlighted on my app. It simply says, "We must never cease to learn." We must never cease to learn. And I remember when I was in school, I was like, okay, this is, I want to know that education has a finish line. Like, I want to be done with finals. I want to be done with projects. I want to graduate and get this over with. Man, this is ridiculous. But there's something about understanding the value of education and understanding how helpful it can be and getting a mindset of being willing to be a continual learner. It's like if you've ever seen The Matrix, where you have that ability to just download knowledge into your brain and all of a sudden you know stuff. Once like you have, yeah, I know Kung Fu. Yeah. You realize that all the knowledge you could possibly want is out there ready to suck into your brain, especially now between the internet and social media and all the digitized information we have. There is no excuse except for laziness for any reason why we could not get out there and learn as much as we could. And the better prepared we are with our education, whether it's formal education or informal, that just puts us in a place where we can help the world around us, we can help our fellow man, and we can actually make the world better. And I think that's why it's so valuable. It's not just to be self-serving or to make money. It's to make the world a better place.
Yeah, and you bring up actually a really good contrast, is that sometimes we think that when the church talks about education, they want you to get formal education. It does. Don't get me wrong. It does want you to get that. But that doesn't mean it's the only type of valuable education. There are all kinds of ways to learn now. And there's so much. Like, I was with my son, he's 12, and we were surfing YouTube, and I found these ones about the history of the Civil War. And I was like an hour and a half in just learning about the Civil War and war tactics and generals and how they felt about things. And I'm like, this is really cool. Like, I'm learning cool stuff. get my own war chapters of the Book of Mormon from the Civil War. But just going on to that section in section 1, it talks. President Hinckley says, "You belong to a church that teaches the importance of education. You have a mandate from the Lord to educate your minds and your hearts and your hands. The Lord has said, 'Teach ye diligently.'" And one of the things I hear a lot about is the idea that the church doesn't. I shouldn't even say the church, but people say the church. Maybe there's some cultural expectations in there, but there's not a lot of real emphasis, or sometimes there's a de-emphasis on women getting their education.
Yep.
I've heard some girls say, "I'm just gonna get married, so I don't need to go to college." And a lot of times the refute is, "Well, what if your husband leaves you? What if your husband dies? Then what are you going to do?" And I'm like, that's one piece of it, but if we take away the fear tactic now, walk this back and say, you should learn stuff so that you can be a better person and give more to your community. I mean, no matter what it is you want to learn about, if you want to learn how dental hygiene and you just want to make sure your kids have clean teeth, or you want to learn how to do project management and serve in your community while your kids are at school, like, just because your husband isn't dead doesn't mean you can't use an education.
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite classes that I hated at the time, but have come to love and appreciate it afterward. And isn't that always the way it is with the really good classes? Economics. I had to take it twice. I flunked out the first time because I was fresh off my mission, didn't understand how it worked. Took it again, and the final lecture that the professor gave, he said that there are two factors that scientists have studied and found that have the greatest impact. Number one is the dad's level of income. Number two is the mom's level of education. And he spoke, he specifically, yes, I want you to get married. You need to graduate and you need to be an active force for good in the lives of your kids, your husband, and your communities. We need well-educated women in this church. And this is actually one thing that I really, really loved about this chapter. In section 3, there are multiple quotes from Gordon Hinckley when he's talking about how women need to get as much schooling as he could. In fact, I'm going to quote right here. He says, quote, "I urge each of you young women to get all of the schooling you can get. You will need it for the world into which you will move. Life is becoming so exceedingly competitive. It's so very important that we equip ourselves." This reminds me of a story. In 2008, Julie Beck, who was the Relief Society president at the time, she came to BYU to do a devotional. And after the devotional, she met with a group of college-age girls that were there. And one of them asked a question that basically said, is it okay for me to plan on having a big career? And reading between the lines of the girl's comments, it was almost like she was asking for permission to plan her life in the same way that she saw men doing. Guys would have a career and they would go on and get a PhD, or they become a lawyer or a doctor or whatever. And she wanted that too. And she was feeling the cultural pressure to just be a mom and a wife. And so she was like, is it okay if I do this? And Sister Beck's response was, quote, "Girl, go for broke. If that is what your dream is, then go for it. We do not kids, fine, go ahead and do that and reevaluate, but go make and plan your lives the very best they can be." And so I think this is a wonderful future that we're seeing the girls shift into nowadays, that we need to just keep rolling forward, is to help them make a wonderful life with as much education as they can get.
Yeah. And, and even with, it comes time for that family, having a mother who's educated and reads and knows things, it helps the kids. It helps the kids also want to be educated as well.
Yeah.
We are big readers in our home. My wife, Christy, she's been a guest plenty of times, and one of the what's the right word? The blog posts that she has is all about raising readers. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, but just about how to help your kids want to love to read. And I really like President Hinckley. He talks about his own life. I'm just going to find that quote here. Did I unhighlight it? But anyways, he talks about his home life and how, in his home, they had a space dedicated for reading.
Mm-hmm.
A place where they can go and find books and church magazines. Here we go. He says that we were never forced to read, them talking about the books in the house, They were placed where they were handy and where we could get at them whenever we wished. There was a great lesson that we learned from one of our friends who also had children that loved to read. And she would say, if I ever want my son to read a book, I just leave it out. I don't tell him to read it. I don't tell him I want him to read it. I just put it somewhere conspicuous. And all of a sudden I'll find he just has picked it up and just starts reading it. And so I did a similar thing where there was someone who, my son Garen, he has Asperger's, and sometimes it's a struggle for him. It's hard. And so I found an article about someone who had Asperger's, and he talked about how he struggled with it, but how he found a lot of faith and a lot of testimony growing, knowing he was the Son of God, and it really helped him. And I didn't want to be like, Garen, read this. I think it's for you. So I just put it on the printer, and I put it out, so it was hanging over. And then my wife comes home or my wife calls me. She's like, "Did you leave an article out for Garen to read?" I go, "Yeah, I did. Did you read it?" And she's like, "Yeah, he read it and he really liked it." And I'm like, "Yes." It's just the idea of making your home a place where reading is okay, making books accessible, even if they get ruined. We've been through some of these books we have, like my Harry Potter books that we had when we were single and young marrieds. Mm-hmm. We've gone to like the 3rd edition at this point because the kids keep reading them over and over again. That's what we want. We want a home where the kids want to read and they want to learn, where education is not so stringent and structured and made to happen, but that it's a natural occurrence because we want to learn and be better.
The day that we got married, my wife Megan and I, the only piece of advice I remember from the temple sealer is he said, every home needs 2 things. Every good home needs a piano and a bookshelf, and both should be well used and well loved. And that's been kind of like a guiding principle for us. I'm like, okay, I want my shelves full of good books that my kids can dive into on a regular basis.
Yeah, so I call it the study. Sometimes I call it the library. Commonly, it's called the home teacher's room in areas where you've got a little more real estate. I know in California, like my living room, my dining room, my den, my study, and a home teacher's room was all one room. There was like 200 square feet. But here in Arizona, we got a little more space, and so we've got one room, and it's like the nice room. It's the room where the kids go to read, practice piano, have family night. When home teachers come over, they go in that one. It's right outside the front door, so they can't see the rest of the mess in the house.
Yeah. So there's a quote here in section 4 that I really loved when he's talking about not only the schooling of the spirit is important, but the schooling of the mind. This is something that I think is really valuable in our religion and our faith, how we view education as a means to an end, and that end is a greater sense of personal enlightenment, and with it the ability to better serve our fellow men. And any education that is neglecting the elements of the soul and the heart is going to be incomplete. And so whether that means we're studying official church materials or unofficial materials, which are just as valuable and just as valid and some of them can have just as much truth. The point is we need to when we look at our soul as a whole composite being and we give as much time and attention to the spiritual side, then it'll make everything else that much more effective and more efficient, and the rest of the education just continues to flower and grow.
Yeah, that's the thing I loved about going. I went to BYU Idaho online, and one of the things that I loved was they talked about don't just come to school to get a degree. Like that's not why you're here. You're here to learn and be better. And once you come here for an education, not a degree, your experience is going to change. And it did for me. Like I went to school. I haven't finished it. I'm still kind of going, but I'm on a hiatus. But what I was studying was marriage and family studies, and the reason I was studying it not because I wanted to be a therapist, but I wanted to just be a better husband and a better father. Like I wanted to learn how to do that better, and I knew that in my callings I would meet people that were struggling in that area, and if I could help them have better families and have better marriages, that I could serve better, serve the Lord better, and help His children be happy. And whether that's maybe you do accounting for the Lord, whatever it is. There's something that you can do to build the kingdom as well with your education.
Yep.
Well, Ben, is there anything else you want to add to this lesson, or should we talk a little bit about where we can learn more about what you do?
I would say that the final thing that I want to throw on here is just a little bit of practical advice, which is, yes, get as much education as you can, and let's temper that with the reality that not all education is created equal, and the harsh reality is, whereas education can be profitable and useful for us, some education will pay us back in pennies and other education will pay us back in dollars. If there's anybody who's out there who is just starting college or is working through college or wants to know how to get through things, you need to do your homework in the realm of figuring out what graduation placement rates are, figure out what majors are actually useful. Don't just go into it with the idea that any thing. That's the attitude that our parents and our grandparents had, and that reality doesn't really exist anymore. So please do not dig yourself into a hole only to turn around and go, well, I got the education and now nobody's willing to hire me. The reality is that we need to be smart about how we get our smarts. And so do your education about your education, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Well, Ben, you talked earlier about your book you have out and some of your talks. Where can someone find that stuff?
So if you go to Ben, first and last name, BenBernards.com, site where my latest book, Generation, and keeps me posted, or I'll have source materials for anytime I do lessons or talks. It's all there. I'm also pretty active on Facebook and Instagram, so hook me up. I'll see you there.
Awesome. We'll put some links to that in the show notes too, because I know I've listened to some of those talks. I've really enjoyed them. I love the youth speakers because I think like it's a different dynamic sometimes when it comes to other speakers, and so Ben does a great job with that. You want to check it out, especially if you have youth. That's a great thing for road trips. I know summer's winding down, but even if you're going to grandma's house for the weekend, put something like that on a Sunday afternoon. It'll really help your kids a lot. My kids love that kind of stuff right now, and so I'm excited when they want to listen to those things and get better and work on their testimonies, even while they're in the car, not fighting instead. So I love that. Over at This Mormon Life, one of the things that I've been trying to figure out is what we're going to do with the podcast next year. The curriculum for 2018 came out, and it's going to be a lot different. There's not going to be a teaching of the Presidents of the Church manual. A lot of it's going to be, I think, decided at the local level, which makes our job harder because we had it on Easy Street for the past 3 years, where every lesson, I guess 4 years now, goodness gracious, this is our 4th year. Every lesson worldwide was on the same schedule when it came to teachings of the Presidents of the Church. You might be a week or two behind, but same stuff. But now it's going to be different. So go to the show notes. We've got a link in there of some ideas, and we want to hear what you would love from us. What can we help you in 2018 what can we help you do in 2018 to help you be a better Latter-day Saint, help you get more from church, more from the gospel? So check that out there. I'm going to cough for a second. I got that cough, that cold that won't go away. But we thank you guys for joining us. We love doing this stuff for you. Thank you, Ben, for joining me again. I always love having a guest that I get to know better and better, and we get to have better and better conversations. And so hopefully you can create that same dynamic in your class. Have those conversations, get more from Third Hour. If you ever have questions or you need anything, let us know. If you go to this-mormon-life.com, I actually have a little chat box that you can put in there and ask me questions. I had somebody the other day asking me about lesson ideas and lesson help. I'm like, yeah, I'll help you with your lesson. Let's talk about it. And so I enjoy that. I love helping, and I know Ben does too. So even if some of the things that Ben has said, you have more questions on, go to benbernards.com. He's glad to help out. And until next time, we thank you guys for joining us, and we wish you all a fond adieu.